Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. All praise be to Allah. We ask God to send salutations and peace upon our messenger Muhammad, his family and companions. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una. O Allah, teach us what would benefit us. Wanfa'na bima 'allamtana, and benefit us through what you have already taught us. وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين, and increase us in knowledge which will bring us closer to you, all the most merciful of those who show mercy. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. O Allah, open the doors of wisdom for us and send down upon us your mercy. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to our latest edition and class on the book of knowledge from Ihya Ulumuddin. Today's topic is the intellect and its noble nature and the Islamic perspective, as elucidated, of course, by Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. It's connected to what we've been talking about previously, but even without talking about what else has preceded, we could talk about this as a topic, and that's the topic of today, inshallah ta'ala. So welcome to you all to this class, to this drop-in, and to those online as well who follow us. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you benefit from today and any future classes or events. Today we'll kind of talk about this topic as a whole. It's a vast topic, even several hours is not enough to talk about the intellect and all that has been said about it from an Islamic perspective and application and so forth. We're trying to cover, the section here isn't a large section anyway, so we're going to try and cover this, which won't be too much of an issue or a problem. But there is a lot more to discuss that we could go into regarding the intellect, and that will conclude the book of knowledge, actually, that what Imam Ghazali wrote regarding knowledge and its virtues and its nature and its pitfalls and its challenges and etiquettes and manners regarding knowledge. And we will then move on next week, not to book 2 of Ihya Ulumuddin, which is the book of beliefs. We'll move on to a book called The Methodology of the Worshippers. So I recommend you get a copy of this book. I just did during this week, the brothers and sisters admin have been checking for the book online. They found a new translation, actually, a very recent translation, maybe in the last few months even, that's come out. So that's a translation. There is a couple of older translations. So it's, as you can see, a book that's been retranslated, or a new version has come out in English language. So it's a very celebrated work. It's called The Methodology of the Worshippers, Minhaj al-Abidin of Imam al-Ghazali. And it's a decent sized work, but we're going to go over it in 6 weeks or so, starting from next week. Each week we'll go through one of the sections of this book, inshallah ta'ala. And it's about having success in worship, having effective worship, productive worship, and the challenges and the obstacles on that journey to worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with clarity of mind, presence of heart, submission, etc. So that's next week, inshallah ta'ala. It's a new kind of topic, a new book, but it's again each week of that book could be a standalone week as well, because there'll be a different topic every week. So to commence today's topic, the intellect, the aql. So in Arabic we call it the aql. Aqala ayn qaf lam. Aqlun is a common noun in the Quran. It's a common verb in the Quran, the verbal form. Afala ya'qilun, afala ta'qilun. لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير. In Surah Mulk, had we listened and had intellect and thought about things, we would not be from the people of the blaze, of the fire. So it's mentioned in the Quran in its various derivative forms, and many hadith as well regarding the aql. So that's what, when we say the intellect in Arabic, in Islam we refer to something called the aql, the intellect. And in terms of its meaning, and this is what Imam Ghazali is going to talk about in his discourse, he doesn't actually mention this, so I shared it, that in the linguistical meaning, he actually plays down the linguistical meaning. He doesn't go into that discussion in this short section here. But the linguistical meaning of aqala is to restrain, is to hold something back. So the rope that you tie a camel with is called iqal. Aqala, iqal. It's a rope that holds the camel. That's the name of the rope that they tie the camel with. Why? Because it stops the camel from running off, from going wherever it wants. It controls. So what does aqal mean? It means in its application that you have something within you. You have like a faculty within you, let's call it, because you can't call it the intellect. You can't define the intellect with the intellect. We have an ability within you, a process of thinking or behaving or recognizing things that then stops you from doing certain things. We say it, don't we? He's got a bit of common sense. He's got a bit of intellect. He doesn't do silly things. He doesn't do this, or she doesn't do that, because that's the result of the aql, right? So that's something that it's named like that because of the result of it. The other Arabic words for the intellect as well. In the Quran, Allah used the word an-nuha, ulin nuha. In one of the surahs of the Quran, ayat of the Quran, the ulin nuha, the people of nuha, are the people of intellect. That's a translation in English of that word as well. And similar, nuha comes from the word nahi, or prohibition, or forbidding, which in Arabic is the term for that concept of haram. Nahi anil munkar, to prohibit the evil. Wal amru bil ma'ruf, the opposite of nahi is amr, commanding. So why is it called prohibition? Because this people of prohibition, not prohibition, people of thoughtfulness and intellect, stop themselves. They prohibit themselves from certain things because they understand it's not befitting, it's unsuitable, it's a blemish, it's not what a human being should be doing. So that discussion isn't in here necessarily, hence I'm mentioning it to begin with. How Imam Ghazali presents it is by talking about the noble nature, the praiseworthiness of the intellect, which we in Islam believe is the case. The intellect is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to think with, to recognize things. And it's that intellect that allows us to actually surrender. It's through the intellect we recognize that there is a higher power, there is Allah, there is revelation, there are miracles, right? We use the intellect to get to that level, which is a form of the intellect. So Imam Ghazali says that the intellect is the source of all knowledge. That's how we get knowledge from. And it's like a light in the heart, inside of us, that illuminates things. So through this light we see, through this light we recognize, we understand things. If there was no intellect, darkness, ignorance, right? Light and darkness are metaphors for knowledge and ignorance. So aql, intellect, is like a light which allows us to see and learn and understand, and this is how we progress in life. So then he mentions lots of hadith, really, just to start off with, and then later on he kind of goes back to the hadith and explains them in a sense. So I'm not going to go through all of them. What I'm going to is mention a few just to show you the virtues of the intellect. Then I'm going to mention what Imam Ghazali says about the intellect and its various levels and categories, and then how he goes back to these hadith and more hadith and relates them to that particular category. Right? So it's a bit theoretical at the moment. When we go into the examples and the definitions, it'll make a lot more sense. So I'm not going to talk about, Imam Ghazali doesn't really talk about the reality of the intellect. It's really more an application or the use of the intellect and where it should take us. So, the result. That discussion of the intellect, the reality, where it's from, he alludes to it, and he mentions that, the philosophers and groups have talked about this, and he himself in other works did delve into the whole concept of the intellect. He's got a lot of, discourse on that. But in this particular work, which is designed obviously for everyday Muslims to understand their religion, to build an attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he wants us to think for ourselves. He wants us to recognize the noble nature of the intellect and where it should be taking us, right? So he said, so there's many hadith. A lot of these hadith are weak hadith. There's a scholar called Dawood al-Muhabbar, who is a hadith scholar and narrator of hadith. He wrote a book on the aql, and he collected a lot of hadith, a lot of sayings on the aql. So Imam Ghazali quotes a lot from that book, and in the commentaries of the Ihya Ulumuddin, which is originally this is all taken from, there's a lot of discussion around the hadith, around the sayings, etc., especially by Imam al-Zabidi of Yemen, who wrote a commentary on this book and explained the hadith and talked about the hadith. So in terms of the authenticity of these sayings and exactly who they refer to, you'd have to kind of go into lots of discussions. I was reading around it, and it was lots of discussions back and forth. So what we can say and what we can take from, these are sayings that exist in Islam, some may be from the Prophet ﷺ, some may be attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, but maybe are not from him, but they're from the early Muslims. So they're not made up sayings, but they are existent in the early generations of Islam and the Muslims. So some of this is, so rather than quote the Prophet said ﷺ, I'm going to quote you sayings from the early Muslims, inshallah ta'ala. So one of the sayings is that an elder among in there is a lamp. The lamp is within a glass. The glass of it is pearly white, and is lit from a blessed olive tree, neither of the east nor the west, whose oil would almost glow even if untouched by fire. Light upon light, Allah guides to His light whom He wills, and Allah presents examples for the people, strikes forth examples, and Allah is knowing of all things. This ayah, Imam Ghazali says, refers to the intellect. What Allah gave us was the intellect. Another ayah of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and thus we have revealed to you an inspiration of our command. And this inspiration is the aql. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another ayah of the Quran, and is one who was dead and we gave him life and made for him light by which to walk among the people like the one who is in darkness, never to emerge therefrom. So what is this light? This light is the light of the intellect, understanding and gaining knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, He brings them out from darkness into light. And Imam Ghazali says this is a metaphor from knowledge into, ignorance into guidance, into knowledge, right? Removing ignorance, darkness into guidance, into knowledge. Another interpretation is from disbelief, darkness, into iman, into faith. So these are metaphors for things that we would or should do or avoid, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, O people, comprehend your Lord and counsel one another to engage the intellect. Through this you will grasp what you have been commanded to do and what you have been forbidden to do, and know that it will render you worthy of distinction in your Lord's presence. Know well the possessor of intellect, though unappealing to the eye, held in low esteem, of modest rank amongst people, is anyone who conforms to God's laws. Whereas the ignorant is one who disobeys Allah's laws, though they may be appealing to regard, look at, held in high esteem, of lofty rank, well attired and eloquent in speech. Right, so this is something to bear in mind, that when we talk about somebody who's got intellect, we don't mean somebody who can do amazing, things, right? Or can give you lots of facts and figures and look good with things, and people think he's a great person or she's a great person. Intellect is known by its fruits in a way that, look at the person's behavior, look at the person's demeanor, how they carry themselves, how they obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a person of understanding and intellect for Muslims. Another saying, the first thing that Allah created, is a famous saying as a hadith, the first thing that Allah created was the intellect, was the aql. And He said to it, come forward, and it went, go forward, advance, it came forward. Allah said to it, go back, and it went back. And then He said to the intellect, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by my Izzah wal Jalal, by my might and majesty, I have not created any creation nor anything dearer to you, dearer to me than yourself, than you. By you do I take, and by you do I give, and by you I dispense my recompense, and I give good to people, and give them reward, and by you I punish. Right? So it's due to the intellect, how we use this, that ultimately we end up in one or another outcome. In a narration, it says that some people in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ praised a certain person, and it really said he's a great person. The Prophet replied, how is he with regard to his intellect? Then they responded, we told you of his good worship, his good deeds, etc., and you ask us about his intellect. So the Prophet ﷺ said, the fool causes more harm than with his foolhardiness than that caused by the evil of a wicked man. Know that the servants of Allah will be raised up tomorrow in degrees of proximity to Allah in accordance with their intellects. Right? So this doesn't mean somebody who's theoretically knows a lot. We're going to explain this in a moment when we define the intellect and the role of the intellect for a Muslim. Another narration, indeed a person gains through worthy character the degree of one who fasts and spends the night in prayer. A person's worthy character, however, is not complete until his intellect is made complete or whole, whereupon his faith becomes whole and he obeys his Lord and disobeys his enemy, Iblis. Another narration, that the Prophet ﷺ returned from the battle of Uhud which was in the third year after Hijrah, he heard the people saying, again, so-and-so is brave, so-and-so was, valiant, he suffered, he sacrificed, etc. Whereupon the Prophet ﷺ said, as for all this, you have no knowledge of any of it. They responded, how could that be, a messenger of Allah? He said to them, they fought in proportion to that which Allah allotted them of intellect. The support they rendered and their intentions were to the extent of their intellect. So everybody's actions, but what is the real motivation and the heart that presents the action, the individual that presents the action, is based on the intellect, on sound reasoning, understanding, that then produces a change in the heart or an effect in the heart that then produces the action, right? So this is how it works. That which befell them on the field befell them according to an array of degrees, and on the day of resurrection, those stations will be allotted them in accordance with their intentions and their intellects. Right, so it depends what they're intending, and that depends on how they thought and their understanding, right? So this deep understanding. So it's not about, and this is what the Prophet said about Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He said he didn't get ahead of everybody and he become the best because of the amount of his good deeds or his generosity or the things he presented in terms of the amounts. It isn't because of numbers or sizes, but it was because of something that was firmly rooted in his heart. Family that really, penetrated his heart and made him who he was. So it's not about the amount of things we do or the measure of things we do. It's about the quality. It's about the quality, not quantity, as they say, right? And that quality comes through this internal faculty of the heart, which is connected to the intellect, right? And there's a big discussion: where is the intellect? Right? Where is the aql? Is it in here, in the brain, where everybody thinks it is, or is it in the heart? It's not a discussion here mentioned by Imam Ghazali either, but is discussed by many of the scholars from early on in Islam, from like the times of Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa and early on. It's a kind of theological kind of discussion. Where is the intellect, and where does it come from? And many of the scholars, most of the scholars actually believed it was in the heart. It's not in the brain where all you have your neurons and brain waves and etc. It's in the heart. The way where you think, and you decipher between right and wrong, and you make decisions, and your morality is something that's in the heart, not the physical heart, but in this area of the body, right? And funny enough, I think I mentioned this before at some point, I don't know if it's in our classes or otherwise, that they've recently discovered in the last few decades that there are cells in the heart that behave like brain cells, that think. So the heart is not merely just something. The physical heart we're talking about now is not merely just a muscle that pumps blood and that's it. It actually thinks. It actually has thinking capabilities, emotions, maybe ability to decide, think, process information rather than just a physical muscle that just does a bodily function. Right. The brain is obviously where that all is the major root from, but actually the heart has that element as well. And when we say the intellect, we're talking about much deeper things than just the brain functions, right? We're talking about this ability to discern right from wrong, ability to recognize certain things, ability to respond to something, right? No, it's not just about the brain, it's about the whole being in itself, including the soul as well, right? The soul is within the body. Again, the soul, what is it, where is it? It's one of those topics that and we haven't got an answer, by the way, to that. But it's said to be like the soul is in the body, it's in every particle of your body, just like when water dissolves into a substance like paper or some wood or something, and it makes its way eventually to every part of that substance that it dissolves into. That's like the soul in our bodies. It's in every part of us, and when it leaves us, then that part of the body dies, or and hence when they say your soul's taken out of your mouth, it's your feet that become cold first, and it's the body from the lower body that loses the soul first because it's taken upwards. Allahu Alam, this is what he said. These are discussions around the soul, the intellect, and these kind of things. Allah knows best ultimately. So then Imam Ghazali moves on to the categories. So he defines himself for definitions, right? He says there are various definitions, and he presents them to us, and he comments on each one of them. So he says the first one, aql, this is the intellect, is that faculty, attribute of a human being, capability, that deciphers us or sets us aside, and this is, commonly what the general folks say, everyone says, that sets us aside from other animals, beasts, and it allows us to think, if you like, to what they kind of call the speculative sciences, can't call them the rational sciences. It allows us to think in that way. An animal, a beast, doesn't think rationally. It thinks on emotion, on carnal desire, on other desires, right? And it reacts. And it has a level of discernment, yes, but it doesn't have that level that human beings have. And hence, because we have that higher level of intellect and ability, we can control animals. Even the largest of animals, human beings, can control them, right? Although some will kill us pretty instantly, like a lion, but we could still cage a lion. Not human beings can cage lions, right? Tigers, etc. We can deal with because of the intellect. It's not that physical strength that gives us the power over the rest of creation. Allah gave us the ultimate power and control on this earth. Humans are the ones that, as we obviously can see, run the world, make the world go round in a sense, and do everything. It's because of our intellect that sets us aside. That intellect is the ability to think, ability to do things, set up things, make things, right? Design things, create mechanisms, right? To a much higher level than any other creature that exists. And that's the ability we have. And he quotes Imam Harith ibn Asad al-Muhasibi, who's one of the earlier scholars. He says, he gives a definition which is in line with this definition of the aql. It is an innate inclination whereby the speculative sciences are grasped and understood. It is like a light cast into the heart that prepares it thereby to comprehend the existent entities, realities that exist, right? Things that are out there. So this is what a definition of the aql is. And Imam Ghazali says anybody who disagrees with this is being unjust. And this is one form of the aql. This is what the aql does, and this is where it is from. The second meaning of aql, it is the science that comes, or types of knowledge that come into being in the disposition of a child. What does that mean? It means, and it explains it actually, it says, it discerns the possibility of possible occurrences and the impossibility of the impossible and, inconceivable. So what do we mean by this? Give an example. We all know as we grow up, and we're not going to get fooled now because we learned this, 1 + 1 = 2. If somebody said to you, 1 + 1 = 3, raise your hand if you would believe that. Raise your hand if you think you could get convinced to believe that. Anybody think, no, I don't mean brainwashed or, what they call hypnotized. I mean, you have full control of your intellect. Because when you're hypnotized, you haven't got control of your intellect. And you might start believing that, right? But we can't, if you're sane, you have your intellect, which is aql, and aql is somebody who's sane. It's a condition of a lot of things in Islam. If you haven't got aql, you're not really responsible in Islam, right? So if somebody's got aql, I'm talking about if you lost your aql. Yeah, if you lost it, anything can happen, we know that. But somebody who's got the intellect will never fall for 1 + 1 = 3. And if you do, you're in trouble with your intellect. That's what I'm trying to say to you, so don't put your hand up. All right, please don't. It's going to be a big problem if somebody puts their hand up. So this is what it means, that you realize that, it says, he might give some examples here. He says, it is like knowledge that 2 is more than 1, right, obviously, that one person cannot be in 2 places at the same time. And this is the definition given by certain theologians, because they build that level of the intellect to then start telling you that this is possible, this is impossible for Allah, this is necessary. So this is talking about a very theological kind of way to define the intellect. And he mentions here a intellect. It is a facet of the necessary sciences, like the knowledge of the possibility of possible occurrences and the impossibility of the impossible. It's something that you would touch upon if you studied theology, ilm al-kalam, and this kind of thing, right? And basically what it is that, right, we know that, if, for instance, that same concept of 1 + 1 = 2 is necessary. 1 + 1 = 3 is just an impossibility. Similarly, that's the sort of basis, and we start from there. What the theologians then do, and if you study theology, which we will do next time we go into a book of beliefs, they say that Allah is one is a necessity, right? And Allah having a partner is impossible, right? Just like 1 + 1 = 2 is a necessity, and 1 + 1 = 3 is ridiculous. It's not acceptable. So as believers, we need to reach a level in our intellects and rational thinking that we don't just think, oh, I'm believing this is a leap of faith. No, I'm certain, just like 1 + 1 = 2, that Allah exists, that Allah is one. And I'm 110% certain that just like 1 + 1 can never equal 3, that there can never be an partner for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm just giving you the two scenarios. There's a whole process in reaching that. And this is what the theologians kind of went into and delved into. And it's a whole, discussion, lengthy discussion. So that's what's mentioned here, that this is aql. Aql, the ability to get to these conclusions, if you like. The third meaning of aql, it is the sciences derived from the observation of events and circumstances as they arise. So experience teaches you, right? For a person who has become worldly through a variety of experiences and disciplined by the many paths he has journeyed upon, is generally said to be a person of intellect, a person of wisdom, a person who has understanding. Whereas a person to whom these qualities are not ascribed is said to be a person devoid of intellect, naive, stupid, ignorant. This is another category of knowledge that is referred to as the intellect. So it's more the product or the outcome. The fourth meaning of aql applies when the faculty of that innate inclination, this faculty of the aql, in the capacity to discern the consequences of one's actions, results in the capacity to discern the consequences of one's actions. What does that mean? Well, this is what we start off right at the beginning. When you have the understanding to control yourself, to realize this is bad manners, to realize this is rude, this is offensive, that is your aql, your common sense, we may call it, dictating things. It says, for example, it is the ability to control and overcome the desires that motivate one to seek immediate gratification. Your aql says, don't do that. One who has attained this capacity is called a possessor of intellect. Zul aql, he's sahib al-aql, he's got understanding, he's got, common sense. When his decision to undertake or restrain himself regarding a matter is in accordance with a careful consideration of the consequences, not according to his desire and gratification, but he understands what's going to come on. This is the intellect. This is a form of the intellect. This is also among the distinguished traits of humankind and ways in which they are differentiated from all other animals, because animals don't really think of consequences on that basis. They think of consequences on the desires, right? I want this, I'm hungry. If I don't get that, I'm going to die, right? If I attack myself, I will put myself in danger. He thinks that, but it's got to survive. So it's going to go for it. It's going to risk itself, right? That's the level they get to. And sometimes they don't even have that. The fish will jump out of the water because it doesn't have the understanding it's going to die when it jumps out of the water. So it doesn't have intellect, right? Whereas human beings have a lot more understanding than that. Then it goes through these in a different way. It says here, the first is the foundation. The first is the ability to think, the ability to process information, right? We said that. Of the other three, the root and the fountainhead. The second is the branch closest to the first, right? This recognizing this is impossible, this is this. It's like the next step, it's the closest to the root. The third is the offshoot that branches off from both the first and second. And this is when we have experiences, we see things, we know fire burns, we're not going to go to it again, etc., things like that. Since the empirical sciences are derived from the faculties of the innate inclination of the intellect and the necessary sciences, right? It's like logical stuff and deriving understandings. The fourth is the final fruit and its ultimate goal, right? The way you behave is based on your understanding, your intellect. So the first two derive from innate predisposition. So you could be given a level of intellect, and that's what you've got, right? It's your ability to think and process, and hence not theology and rational discussions, logical discussions, not for everyone, because not everyone has the ability. They're not predisposed to not have that built in them, and it's not really acquirable as well, those first two. However, the other two, the final two, are acquired through applied effort. So you can through experience, you can through thinking and reviewing, and life itself and maturity. As you grow, your intellect increases, right? When you're young and you're naive, you do certain things, silly things, emotional, on desires and passions. As you grow up, you learn to control that, right? So this type of intellect grows with time, with experience, with discipline, with application, not just randomly. You need to exercise this ability for it to build further and further. Like a muscle, isn't it? If you exercise it, it gets stronger. And if you leave it, it just stays weak. The brain is that, right? The intellect is like that as well, the ability to recognize things. And in this regard, Sayyidina Ali has beautiful lines of poetry regarding the aql, very famous lines as well. So he said, I saw the intellect, al-aqlu, as aqlan. It's two types of intellect, which is going to refer back to the four we've mentioned. One different to the other. One a disposition, aqlun matbu'un, is naturally there inside everyone. And one acquired through hearing, aqlun masmu', and one that's acquired through hearing, which means here, maksub, acquired. It's something you're going to build. Knowledge acquired through hearing affords no benefit, if you want to benefit from what you experience, etc., if there is no natural or innate, it says here, disposition to it. So you've got to have something there first before you can. So hence why people who don't have any intellect, the base level, we said are not, what we call mukallaf or responsible, or have to believe or pray or fast. You have to have something there to begin with to build on top, right? To then have a decision to make, let's say, right or wrong, you have to have that decision to make. So the one that's heard, the one that's acquired, is based on the level of the one that is innate within us, that Allah placed in majority of humankind. Then he says, just as the sun renders no benefit when the light of the eye is non-existent, right? So if you haven't got anything here, the sun, you can, blindness, right? You can't see because there's no problem in the sun. There's a problem in this here, right? So this is what we need to understand. He says the first category, that of the innate inclination, the ability to figure things out, is intended in the words of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. God created nothing more honored by him, honored by Allah, than the intellect, right? The ability to think, understand, decipher things, right? And the ability to move forward. The final intellect, which is the fruit, the ability to behave, the behavior itself, which is the possessor of intellect, look how he's behaving, well done, was intended by Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, when the people draw close to Allah by righteousness and worthy acts, you must draw close by means of your intellect. You must understand, learn, and move forward with your intellect. This is the meaning intended in the word of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he spoke to Abu Darda. Increase in intellect, you will increase in proximity to your Lord. Intellect here, the final category of practice of good behavior. Realize things, behave in the right way, have common sense, and you will get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said here actually, to which he responded, Abu Darda, may my father and mother be your ransom. How could such be for me? How could I attain this? The Messenger of Allah said, shun Allah's forbidden things, stay away from them, accomplish God's obligatory acts, and you will be one who possesses intellect. Undertake, this is beautiful, undertake worthy endeavors, and this shows intellect in people, worthy endeavors. What do we do with our lives? Now, people who just want to enjoy themselves, are they really people of intellect? They're people of, real deep thought and understanding. Or they're just following their desires, right? They might be doing amazing things, making lots of money, let's say, or looking very nice and get a lot of recognition. But what is the worthy endeavor that they're after? Where is it taking them? What are they doing, right? What legacy will they leave behind? The Prophet ﷺ, the greatest of all endeavors, he guided mankind, right? He sacrificed for people to believe in God, to find right guidance, right? This is the worthiest of endeavors, right? The highest. But anything like that, any help, are you setting up help for others in society? Are you educating? Are you providing, something? So he says here, undertake worthy endeavors, your share of esteem and honor will increase in this world. But more importantly, and in the next world, you will attain a station of proximity and nobility from your Lord. Who is the greatest of all people? The Prophet ﷺ. He's at the top, without a doubt, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because he's a prophet and all the prophets are at the top. What was the work of the prophets? What was the role of the prophets? It was to communicate revelation to mankind, to guide mankind. In one narration, Jibreel Islam was asked, what would you have done if you had the choice to do good acts? He said, I would have done the acts of the prophets. I would have guided people because that was the prophets and they are the best. So they were doing the best actions, right? So that's what Jibreel Islam said he would do, right? So think about that you will have the greatest of rewards and stations in the next life and nobility with Allah because you followed the Prophet ﷺ, because you had those, projects in mind, ideas, not just ideas, actually, that's no good. I don't like people ideas. I like people who do stuff for him, who accomplish, who execute in the right way, right? Execute in the positive way, right? Execution is accomplishment, is carrying out things, not execution and killing people, right? People can misinterpret words, right? We talked about words and how people get things wrong with words, and so be careful, right? So this is what we need. We need people who don't just give an idea, but actually accomplish one, and if you give me, a pound for every time somebody has a good idea, I'd be a millionaire, right? We'd all be millionaires. But if you give me a pound for every time somebody does something good and takes an idea forward, I wouldn't be that wealthy. Might get somewhere, but not really that far. 10, 20 quid maybe, right? But we need more. We need, there's so much to do in this community and around us, and so forth, right? There's so much to do for all, aspects of society, Muslim, non-Muslim, young and old, male and female, all sorts of areas, education, health, well-being, there's so many things we could talk about, but this is what the intellect is about. This shows somebody who's a person of intellect if they're thinking in this way and they're moving forward in their life in this way. Otherwise, if you've got great endeavors and they're all about dunya, 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 world, 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 then that's not a sign of great intellect. That's a sign of lack of intellect, lack of understanding, and in the end there'll be some recognition in the world, some fake recognition. It's worldly, human, temporal recognition. Yeah, you might get something, but there'll be nothing after that other than reckoning, other than accountability, and no rewards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of your intentions, because of your lack of understanding. So this is important that we recognize this. The Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith, so talking about the same concept, the possessor of intellect is one who has faith in Allah. That's intellect, right? That's understanding. Affirms the message of his messengers and is conscient in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the thing, it's rational and logical to believe that Allah exists. Today's day and age, people trying to present this idea that religion and belief is irrational, right? Is weird, it's taboo. It's not something that's not part of mainstream society or the real way. It's old superstitious, old wives' tales. This is what religion and faith is. But in reality, if you look at history, the actual greatest of all thinkers believed in God, right? The greatest philosophers, the greatest minds that everyone today bases their own understandings of and are influenced by massively. They had different beliefs in what God is or how creation started, but they believed in a creator. They believed in a cause of the universe, let's say. They believed in something that happened. They didn't just say it was all random and nothing, right? That was what intellect and sound logical thought led them to. And they presented solid arguments, by the way. So I'm not just saying this as it was them and their emotions. No, they presented sound, rational arguments that until this day have not been, and cannot be because they sound logical arguments, have been refuted. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. And I said to you, we can get to that end where God exists, or something exists actually, to be honest, right? All religions believe that a God exists, but many, even people who don't believe in religion, who believe God exists or a creator exists, have got to the same conclusion based on sound, rational thought. Now, it's a leap of faith without a doubt to believe in God and religion and practices and revelation and so forth. We can't say, belief is a rational thing. No, belief is beyond rationality. It's separate, But rationality tells us it's all possible, let's say. Let's take that level. Is it possible this world as a creator? Yes, there's nothing irrational about it. We'd go further and say it's necessary based on such and such proofs, but is there, can we be resurrected? Can we be brought back to life? Is that impossible? Is that inconceivable? No. Do we believe in something that's inconceivable, irrational? No, of course not. Resurrection, just like we created the first time, cannot be created again and again and again, right? Don't we see something, the leaves fall off the trees every autumn and winter, then come back? Doesn't Allah tell us to reflect over these things, how they're renewed, right? Similarly, we're going to be resurrected. It's a very possible thing that we know is going to happen through revelation. We believe is going to happen because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, and other religions believe this as well. So what we find is that if you go back to rational thought and you go step by step and you build it up, it takes time, of course, it takes study, and it's not a simple thing that can just be understood in 1 minute or one lesson. But you will find the great thinkers of the past had great arguments and great discourse. In our history classes, we were talking about a Jewish philosopher called Maimonides, right? Musa ibn Ma'mun, who lived in Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus. And, I was reading further about it the other day, and they say the Jewish golden age was that same time as Islamic Spain, because the Jewish, the Christians, the Muslims, and even the, non-religious Hispanic people, whoever they were there, right? They were all mixing together. They were given the opportunity to think, to exchange cultures and talk about foods and stuff and this and that. It was a beautiful place. Unfortunately, things turned and went bad, and the Europeans came in and kind of did their thing, the Franks, etc. But that's history, right? But what you learn, and he's the most celebrated Jewish rabbi, thinker, philosopher in history, and they really look up to him. you find that his name was Arabic name, Musa ibn Ma'mun, because that's the language spoken and what he was called. He wrote most of his works in Arabic that were later translated into Hebrew. He was in Islamic Spain. That was the language, predominant language that they were using, Latin as well, and etc. Right? So there's a big exchange of cultures. And he writes books on the existence of God that the Muslims used, that the Muslims benefited from, that the Muslims commented upon. He himself obviously took from the tradition that preceded him of the Islamic theology and etc. So he was actually another scholar in theology, in Islamic theology. Although he's a Jewish person, you could actually count him as one of the scholars of theology, not orthodox or anything like that, but a scholar of theology, right? That he put forward his ideas on the beliefs in God and why God exists. And he wrote a book called The 25 Proofs on the existence of the Lord of the worlds, right? And it was a beautiful book that has commentaries on it by Muslim scholars. And not too long ago, a scholar in Damascus called Jamaluddin al-Qasimi, rahmatullah alayhi, great scholar, he wrote a book, a similar book. He based it on that, but he rewrote the whole thing and he presented it in a totally different way. Again, 25 proofs, different proofs to be honest, but again he put 25 proofs on why God exists. Why would God exist for? Give us an argument. And he puts 25 proofs. It's a longer book. It's more of a discussional book and presentation, whereas the original work, or the work from the Jewish Maimonides, was more a logical, philosophical, very to the point work, right, which requires a lot of understanding to break down. This work, recent work, would be like 50, 80 years ago, something like that. Early 20th century he was around. Is more for the public, more a read that you could just read through and kind of grasp a bit, and talks about different angles of why God exists. And this is what we need to expose ourselves to and build our intellects through. It's all an intellectual approach. The Muslims had great intellectualism. They weren't scared of the Greek philosophy. They weren't scared of translating the works. They weren't scared of addressing these issues in the past. They wrote many great works, but unfortunately, due to the degeneration of learning and studying Islam and scholarship, there's not many people that are of the same caliber or even aspire to kind of learn those sciences and go in that. And it's not required. Muslims need strong faith, right? And not necessarily by studying theology, you won't get strong faith as well, by the way, right? That's an intellectual ability. But it is required to some degree, especially in today's day and age, when we do have this, like you mentioned at the beginning, this attack on religion and belief, and anything unseen is just illogical. Why should you believe in something unseen? You can't touch it, feel it. It's materialism in a sense, atheistic materialism. That's what it all has come down to. Marxism isn't too far from that, right? And all that kind of thing, right? So it's all about, if it's not there. And Marxism was even worse because they went to the extreme that if you believe in something that doesn't exist, want to kill you, right? Because you believe in falsehood, because only that which exists physically is what you can believe in. Materialism, Marxism is same thing really, right? Read into it. It was a very bad thing that affected Russia and Northern Europe, and then went into the Islamic countries, and it impacted Central Asia, like places like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. They had a lot of socialism, communism go into there, which was the product of Marxism. Is really horrific, right? Socialism, Marxism is really all a offshoot of that happened a few centuries ago. Which was refuted by the Muslim scholars, by the way. That's the point to make. So if you want, did anybody speak against it? What has the scholar said? Yeah, there's works written, deep works written by the scholars explaining that whole concept, why it's wrong, where they have flaws in their ideas. Alhamdulillah, like I said, whatever the challenges were, however time the Muslim scholars came forward and dealt with them. So we have this, alhamdulillah, on a tradition of orthodoxy and scholarship in theology. But that's a whole topic in itself. I'm going to be off track. And then it mentions the idea of the linguistical. It says, our goal, however, is not in-depth research into the linguistic implications of the term, right? So Imam Ghazali doesn't really go into the term linguistically, but he does mention that sometimes a concept is given or referred to by its result. So he says knowledge is reverence, because knowledge produces reverence, awe. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. It is only those who possess knowledge that truly have awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that's the fruit of knowledge, right? So Similarly, for intellect, they say that, the intellect, to possess intellect is to have belief in God. To possess intellect is to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's a sound-minded person is what he or she would do. Right? And it's illogical and ignorance and just that's what Ibn Abbas said. He said somebody who disobeys Allah has not understood Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that moment, they do not know what Allah, the concept of God. They're sinning because if they knew, they would fear Allah. If they knew He had intellect understanding, they would not ever disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So nobody obeys Allah with knowledge, with understanding. We lose that when we follow our desires and whims. We lose that we cloud our minds, and it goes to a basic human internal desire that results in these acts of disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he gives some examples of how the intellect works. So he says an example of how the intellect works is and how we recognize it and see the intellect. We want to understand it exactly, and how these four categories that I actually mentioned previously, the result and the basic level of discernment. He says it's like water, it's in the ground. The water that's in the ground is the water you've got, but you can't see the water in the ground. Right? How do we see the water in the ground? How do we get it? We have to dig it up. Right? We have to make wells. So he says, it becomes manifest when shafts are dug underground, then it collects in basins and cisterns and is discernible by the senses. We know there's water there now. There's water in the ground. It is not the case that it arises by bringing something new into it. When the water comes to you, it's not something new than what was already there. Right? The same is true in the case of oil in the almond and rose water in the rose. They are realities that exist within that larger being, or wherever they are found. And to discover them takes a process, right? This is the stages of the aql. It exists within us. We've got intellect, got the ability to get things right. Allah's given us that, ability to know this is right, this is wrong, our morals and characteristics. By the way, there's another discussion, by the way. What is the role of the intellect in defining right and wrong? Do our intellects define, or does Allah define it? Right? Allah defines it. That's the outcome of the discussion. But there were some Muslim groups that said, no, we put the intellect first, and then we, take the Sharia or the text of the Sharia, which caused a lot of problems. The Mu'tazilites were this group, the rationalists, that's what they called, the Mu'tazilites. Mu'tazilite doesn't mean rationalists. They were rationalists, so they were known as that. But Mu'tazilite means I'tizal means the ones that took off, the withdrawers. They went away from the circles of orthodoxy that were in at the time, and they made their own sort of ideas based, and they were the ones that were influenced by the Greek philosophy and didn't respond to it in the way that the Orthodox Muslims and scholars did, and hence a lot of their points and beliefs and ideas are very similar to Greek philosophers and that kind of thinking, the Hellenistic period, etc. It's because that was a time in Baghdad where the books were being translated from the Greeks, and the Muslim scholars dealt with that, but some obviously were influenced and went the other way. So they emerged around that time of the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century AH, and many groups emerged and so forth, right? Allah says in the Quran, and mention when your Lord took from the children of Adam from their loins their descendants. Allah took forth everyone and made them testify of themselves, saying to them, am I not your Lord? And everybody replied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, shahidna, we have testified. Now, how did we testify? There was no tongues to testify with. There was no human bodies at that time, right? So Imam Ghazali says, the intent in this verse was the attestation of their souls, not the attestation of the tongue alone. For in the matter of the attestation of the tongue, once tongues and individuals were created, people were separate. They were different. Once we were created, not everybody's tongue testifies. Not everybody agrees. People are separated into those who testify that God is the truth and exists, and those who deny. Right? So there was a different level of acknowledgement back then, which is within us all, but it's not always discovered by everyone. For this reason, he says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you ask them, he says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you ask them who created them, they would surely say, Allah. Right? If you ask them, i.e., meaning if you were to reflect upon their circumstances, their souls and innermost beings, they would attest to the verse, adhere to the fitrah of God upon which He has created all people. Meaning all the children of Adam were endowed with this innate disposition, the innate ability to have faith in Allah. Moreover, they have the ability to realize the inherent nature of things as they are. So that was not just Allah, but everything. Like, we should have, if we were sound, obviously there's a distortion, right? But if we were sound-hearted, we would find the right, way in life, the right decision. We'd understand things as they should be understood and use things as they should be used, etc. By this I mean that the realization of things is as if it contained in the souls, that if it is contained in the souls, in order to bring the propensity of them near to full comprehension, to really understand they are as they are. So this wasn't a verbal covenant, this was a covenant with the souls, right? And there's different opinions with the souls there, did the souls respond, how was the response? But it was something built into us, that we all, is a part of us. Allah carries on to say, lest you deny this testimony later on, that you all bear witness to it, and human beings, and Allah knew that we will, and hence Allah mentioned, lest somebody comes and says, I didn't make covenant. We all made that covenant. It wasn't within this physical realm of body and tongue and physical being. It was back then with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the final thing to discuss, we're running short of time, and I'm going to summarize it too because it's just going to take too much time, is the disparity in aql, like different levels and people having different abilities and so forth. And Imam Ghazali says that people are different with regards to the first, third and fourth. The first type, third type and the fourth, or the first, third and fourth you're saying, right? You didn't make notes, you're not following, right? Don't worry, we'll mention them again. The first is that innate ability to figure out, it's an ability, so people differ in abilities. The second one is that of recognizing 1 + 1 = 2, and 1 + 1 does not equal 3. We're all the same in that. If you've got the aql, like I said, you're saying, that's fine. That's the level of aql that nobody differs on. And if you differ on, you haven't got aql, basically. Right? That's what we said. So the second one, there's no disparity. The third and fourth, there is disparity because they're kind of connected to the first as well, in that how do you learn through your experiences, right? How do you process information, empirical stuff, right? People differ on that, hence people are much more intellectual when it comes to certain things. And the final one is behavior and conduct, right? And how you present yourself, again, is based on not just intellect, of course, right? That's what we're talking about, but also your relationship to God and your intellect in understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His commands, and realizing the command is what's important, like that, worthy pursuits. Some of us have worthy pursuits because that intellect is there. Some of us don't have worthy pursuits because our intellect, the real intellect, is not there, right? So people do differ in life in what they will do and how they behave and what they achieve and what they understand and what they process, because of the different levels in intellect, right? And Imam Ghazali talks about this, and he gives, a def kind of, and then he makes a very important point, because how can we compare the intellect of the prophets, alayhi salatu wasalam, to simple-minded people, Bedouins and people who just think like very linear or very straightforward, and they don't reflect and think on things. How can we compare the intellects of the great thinkers and the philosophers to just everyday people? We see the difference; it's obvious. So it's not to say that everybody is the same is a misdemeanor. It's not really something that we can accept. And then he says, talking about the reason why the prophets have special intellect and maybe are greater than everybody else. He says that there's a unique manner in which Allah bestowed knowledge on the prophets, and that was via angels. So we're given knowledge through experiences, through other human beings. That's our connection to knowledge. That does go back to Allah in a sense, because revelation is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they were the first stage of connection between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this earth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending down a message, communication to this earth was via the angels to the prophets, and via the prophets to the rest of the creation. So he says that from the angels to the prophets differs from explicit revelation that invokes hearing a distinct voice. So that's one way, the angels. There was a level where Allah revealed directly to the hearts of the prophets, where you hear a voice, which is different to witnessing an angel by means of eyesight, right? There's something that happens internally, where Musa alayhi salam was spoken to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet met Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and had a conversation. And this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicates with the innermost heart of the prophets. And that's a level that is not acquirable or attainable, or you can't earn it. It's a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He chose the prophets subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're the ones that received that. Our level of intellect can therefore not reach their level of intellect. We can only get to the level of acquired intellect, which is through our experiences, our learning, and also, to be honest, the natural God-given talent as well, right? Because that base level also has an impact on what you can learn. There is a level you can attain through hard work and study and reflection, but it also depends on that natural given ability. And we are at different levels according to that as we said earlier, and what Imam Ghazali mentions, right? And then he goes on to kind of talk about some of that intellectual gibberish that we can't understand, and how people say things, philosophers say things, the Sufis say things, and they make statements, and it's not within the aql of everyone to understand the terms, the terminologies, or what they intended, or based on what are they saying things, etc. So there's a lot of confused statements that have arisen from the ignorant of groups. They don't have the intellect. But it's also, as we mentioned before, the role of those of intellect not to present that which somebody else can't comprehend. And that's going to cause denial, right? It doesn't make sense. I don't understand that. Or you're just talking, weird. So this is something of what Imam Ghazali says in this section of the intellect. There is another angle I could have brought in, and I had kind of planned, but it's just not enough time, and I knew there wouldn't be, is the role of the intellect when it comes to Islamic sciences, right? Because there was the element of, beliefs and theology, but also in terms of hadith, and what's the role of aql and hadith and the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran, right? Because there is a discussion, is this illogical in the Quran or not, and so forth. In terms of fiqh rulings, Sharia and logic, and how does that work? So this is something that the scholars have discussed very early on, and they presented these arguments in the books of usul, really, theories of law, theories of Islamic jurisprudence, etc. It's an important discussion, to be honest. It's very relevant to kind of a lot of things, but we don't have time for that, right? So this ends the book of knowledge by Imam al-Ghazali, and it's the first book of the 40, or the first quarter as well, in the 40 books of the Ihya Ulumuddin. The next book is called the book of, or the Aqidah book Imam Ghazali is called Qawa'id al-Aqa'id, the foundations of belief. So it's called Kitab. The next book is called Kitab Qawa'id al-Aqa'id, the foundations or the principles, the principles of our doctrine. And that is book 2 of the Ihya Ulumuddin. It's a full-on book of theology. So literally you've got to study traditional Islamic theology in that book, inshallah ta'ala. But we'll conclude here for this, and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit us through what we have read, discussed, learned from this work of Imam al-Ghazali, the book 1 of the religious sciences, or the revival of the religious sciences. We ask Allah to ennoble Imam Ghazali and reward him on our behalf, and benefit us through his teachings, through his du'as. He must have made du'as for his people to read his books, and so we hope we are of those people that benefit from his works and his du'as, inshallah ta'ala. We make du'a for him that Allah accept his hard work for the ummah, the sacrifices he made, and accept all of us ultimately, and forgive us for any shortcomings, any mistakes, any mishaps. Perfection lies with Allah alone. The mistakes are from us, and we ask forgiveness for them, and we ask you to forgive us and pardon us for anything that's happened. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Any questions? So we are at half 8, we already finished, but I had to try to get to the end. Yeah, one question from either side, right? Brothers first. Ladies first. Any questions on the ladies' side? Would you like to ask anything about today? No? Okay, fine. This is your question, Ali.
Sheikh, when we talk about when we define the aql and the different levels that people have, and when we say that, obviously, different people have different levels of aql. So in English, you say a poor man's pound is the same as a millionaire's million. So your efforts based on your aql level, that's what we'll take into account. And some of the first.
Did we mention last week that there's many simple people that are millionaires as well? Yeah.
And so
I know, did I mention it here? I think I mentioned it somewhere else. We went on Hajj, I'll tell you. Went on Hajj 2015, and we met an uncle who was a millionaire. He didn't have a clue about anything, right? So how did he become a millionaire? He was like talking to his friends. This is somebody else telling us. He wouldn't tell us, but the person who telling us, he was his uncle. He brought him to Hajj basically. So what happened was he's a very simple uncle, very like one of them, like really quiet, simple-minded, nothing. How did he make millions then? So basically he had a discussion with his mates, and they're talking about this, that, the other, and they ended up convincing him to buy a property. Right? So he ended up buying this like property, whatever it was, right? It was like a little place, decent sized place. So obviously he's the owner and he doesn't know what to do with it. He's bought this place, a few £100,000, whatever it was, big, decent size. So then he gets a phone call, and it's I'm not going to say which supermarket, but he mentioned the supermarket, and it is that supermarket today in Birmingham. They phoned him and said, we want to buy your property. So he goes, yeah, he goes, what do you want? He goes, so he obviously bought it for a certain amount. He put it up, and I think he said, like £800,000 or something. So he says, okay, that's fine, we'll do a deal. Put the phone down, went back, spoke to people. He goes, you just said 800, they accepted it, asked for more. So he went back and he goes, I decided I want more. I want $1 million. So he goes, okay, we'll give you $1 million. Right? It's like, what's going on? Do you need intellect today? He didn't know what he was doing. It's like just asking him randomly, like this uncle, I want $1 million more. And he's like, yeah, we'll give you. So then he goes, did they give you $1 million? He's talking to his friends. He goes, he's telling them what he's getting. So they were like, ask for more. So he goes, yeah, I want 1.2 million. So he goes, okay, we'll give you 1.2 million. Right? So he's got a building. He's probably making £1 million on it or so. And then he does the same again. They goes, no, that's enough. So we'll stop you there. If you want 1.2, you can take it, because that was probably their budget or something. And if you don't, no. So he ended up, making £1 million. What did he know about properties, investments? He's randomly bought a building. They phoned him to, and they're giving him offers and just buying it. So it's not really intellect that gets you money. It doesn't get you money. Of course, there is an element of that, right? The more shrewd you are, sharper you are, business-minded you are, it does. But that's not the only cause.
Sorry, Sheikh, if I get a question. It wasn't the monetary value.
Okay.
It's more that the saying is that if somebody puts an effort a lot less of a capability, then it's seen in the same light as somebody who has great intellectual effort and can have these great thoughts, and somebody who has less. Now, one of the things that I have in my mind is that the upper, especially the first and second level, the basic upper, we know through behavioural sciences that people now can actually be taught, and we know this through advanced media studies, that they use triggers, music, colours, sound to change standard cognitive behaviour. And this is why you get some people that turn into monsters. Right, okay. Because of teachings and stuff. And so, how do you...
So I think I kind of get your point, right? Even those people that attain great levels of thinking and, understanding or whatever, doesn't really make them great, okay? Because there's a second element. What did we say the ultimate intellect was, 3 and 4, is that behavior. So there's many great people that thought great things, but they did silly things in their actions, right? So for us as Muslims, obviously from an Islamic perspective, the intellect in Islam is that practice, is that belief, is that, right behavior. So you could have the greatest thinker in the world, but a simple Muslim is better. Why? Because the intellect in that person, Muslim, who has understanding of God has commanded this, God has commanded a very simple level of everyday knowledge or everyday intellect. But in terms of the Islamic concept of intellect, it's very up there, it's very high, right? Now going back to your second point, or the things you mentioned second, which is that people can use that to, and it's normally, and by the way, the norm in us is to use it for good. So we've been given intellect, the norm, the standard sort of disposition, the natural, untainted one, is one of doing good. So if we didn't, manipulate or, distort the human being, everyone would do good with that intellect. But that's exactly what you just said there. Because of that sort of input, that control mechanism, and there's new things they're discovering every day. In the past, hypnotism is one of them, and triggers, like you said, NLP is one of them, and that kind of thing, right? They are using that for capitalism, worldly stuff, power, control, is the case. So that's a manipulation or distortion of the real role of the intellect. And again, that's haram to do if it's going to cause harm to people, right? You can use that as mechanisms for good and enhance the intellect and give people positive triggers and positive, reinforcements. Can't see a problem with that, but, it depends. Yeah, exactly. A lot of things come from, that's the aql. It develops from the people around you. A lot of people's aql is that, it's great to drive a car because that's what people around them do and that's what they think is cool. Other people have much more serious things in life because they're around serious people. So company has an impact on that as well. That's the third category, that where things, experiences develop your mind and understanding. So we need to be in good company and around good people who think in not just the way we all think, but because that's how we are today. We're all influenced by the capitalistic way of thinking or behaving, because that's the people around us, the schools, the workplaces, the media. It's all promoting, like. Yeah, that's it. Just improve. Look yourself, make yourself look good. You need to own lots and lots of things and buy. And if you haven't got this, then you're behind everyone, and you're less of a person, because that's what's being put into our minds and our thoughts and our discourse. It makes us think like that, and that's the problem, because that's not the way that Allah wants us to think. That's not the way the generally the Muslims thought in the past, or early Muslims at least. Yeah, there were people amongst them, but the general Islamic thought was more geared towards preparing for the akhirah by making the most of this world. That's what people don't get, that balance. Two extremes, dunya or akhirah, and there's nothing in between. No, if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you look at the life of Sahaba, they used this dunya. They built an amazing system in Medina. They built a civilization. We should have studied the whole of Medina and how it developed. It was amazing. And that was the foundation for other great civilizations of Islamic Spain we mentioned, of Baghdad, and of what happened in Damascus and the Ottomans. And this was all based on the Islamic principles, morals, beliefs that pushed those people to do that. Even other parts of the world as well, you could carry on. But we've lost that. And, we've taken our leaders, our discourse, our way of thinking as, whatever you want to call it, secular or Western or capitalistic. It's not an Islamic worldview we have in our lives anymore. It's I don't know what to call it, capitalistic worldview, that this worldview. There's Islamic one here, there's that one there. And there's other ones as well. There's the socialist, communist, whatever. They're all different views in this world. That control or dictate your behavior, what you do with your life, how you invest your time, your money, your efforts, what you want to achieve. And all of them don't lead you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They lead you to depression and bankruptcy. And ultimately, you might be stages where you're feeling good and all right, but ultimately they don't lead to anything but destruction and end in failure. This is the one path that leads to somewhere, or the only place we want to be, which is with Allah and in success in the next life. Those worthy endeavors we're talking about, they're here. Like, how many of us have taken on ourselves to be a part of those worthy endeavors? Maybe that's the message we leave you with at the end of this book, right? Which worthy endeavors are you a part of, or you starting, or you want to be a part of, or supporting, or even just have the intention? Because that intention is a sign of the intellect being there. So may Allah make us amongst those people of great endeavors, positive endeavors of intellect. And like I said, forgive us for any shortcomings. May Allah bless you all. Jazakumullah khairan. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Next week we'll be here and we'll start the book called Methodology of the Worshippers. I think they're ordering a few copies because it is available. If you want to bring your own, it's fine. It's a free class, but the book might have like 5 copies we might order to be available to purchase. There's no guarantees. Somebody might get it before you. So if you want to bring your own, that's good and fine. We will order a few. I think they're trying to get a few just in case anybody wants to buy it next week, inshallah ta'ala. So thank you very much. See you next week for those of you who will attend. And if not, whenever